evidence of the Picts and their kingdom has been hard to find. Now, though, a team of archaeologists thinks they might just have pinpointed the seat of Pictish power.
For 1,500 years, the answer to one question has been a guess. Who were the Picts? Were they painted warriors from Scythia? A lost tribe that vanished into thin air? Now we finally have the answer, and it's locked in their very bones. New genetic evidence from ancient Pictish bodies has solved the mystery. And the thing nobody tells you is that their DNA not only changes history, it also debunks their most famous tradition. Unlocking the Pictish code. Here's where it gets strange. The Picts left behind a staggering legacy. Hundreds of incredible carved stone monuments covered in mysterious symbols that, even today, nobody can fully understand. They created beautiful, intricate metalwork and built impressive stone forts. Yet, they wrote almost nothing down about themselves. No detailed histories, no letters, no personal stories. Just those haunting symbols on standing stones, scattered across the Scottish landscape like a code nobody could crack.
Then, around the 9th and 10th centuries, they just disappear.
Their culture, their language, and their identity seemed to merge with another group, the Gaels and the Picts, as a people vanished from history. To put it mildly, this mystery left a huge blank space for people to fill with guesses. For centuries, historians and writers came up with all sorts of wild origin stories. The famous Anglo-Saxon scholar, the Venerable Bede, writing in 731 AD, claimed they were foreign immigrants. He said they came from Scythia, a vast region way over by the Black Sea. Others said they came from Thrace, in southeastern Europe, or even from mysterious islands north of Britain. These romantic tales captured the imagination. People loved the idea of these blue-painted warriors arriving on ships from far away, bringing strange customs. But was any of it true? Until right now, we simply didn't have the tools to find out. That's where modern science enters the picture. An international team of researchers, led by scientists from Liverpool John Moores University and the University of Aberdeen, decided to tackle the Pictish mystery head-on. Their weapon? Cutting-edge ancient DNA analysis. This was not an easy task. You see, human remains from the Pictish era are surprisingly rare. The acidic soil of Scotland is not good at preserving bones. Finding samples good enough for genetic sequencing took years of careful work. The team focused on two very important Pictish cemeteries. The first was at London Links in Fife, representing southern Pictland. This site is famous for its amazing stone monuments and elaborate burials. The graves included stone-built boxes, called cists, and marker mounds called cairns. It was likely a place for high-status people. The second site was at Ballantor in Easter Ross, representing northern Pictland. Together, these two spots gave researchers a good spread across the Pictish kingdoms. Scientists successfully got DNA from 8 different people. 7 came from London Links and 1 from Ballantor. This might not sound like a lot, but in the world of ancient DNA, it's a huge victory. They managed to sequence 2 complete, high-quality genomes, one from each site. The results, published in a major science journal, were the bombshell. When the genetic results came back, they completely destroyed those medieval legends. The DNA proved, without a doubt, that the Picts were not mysterious immigrants from Scythia or anywhere else. They were local. Their genes showed they were descended from the Iron Age populations who had lived in Britain for generations, long before the Romans ever showed up. Dr. Adeline Morris, the lead author of the study, explained it clearly. The findings support regional continuity. The Pictish gene pool was drawn from older Iron Age people, not from some big migration. This one fact changes everything. It means the Pictish culture, the amazing art, the unique symbols, the powerful kingdoms, wasn't imported. It was an indigenous culture, born and bred right there in the Scottish Highlands. But this was only the first shock. The DNA held another secret, one that would undo the most famous and bizarre fact everyone thought they knew about the Picts. Forging a kingdom in the cold. So, if the Picts were local, who were they? What many overlooked is that their story begins with the Roman Empire. When Roman legions marched into northern Britain, they didn't find a single, unified Pictish nation. They found a hornet's nest of different tribes. The name the Romans gave them, Picti, or painted people, gives us our first clue. The Roman writer Claudian wrote of the tattooed Picts. This has led to centuries of debate. Were they literally covered in blue tattoos, as movies often show? Or did they just paint themselves with a blue dye called woad before a battle, to look more terrifying? The truth is, we don't know for sure. But the name stuck, and it shows that their appearance was striking, and to the Romans, savage. They weren't just savage, though. They were brilliant. The Romans, with the most powerful army on earth, could not beat them. The famous Roman governor Agricola tried to push all the way to the end of Scotland. He was met by a massive tribal army led by a chieftain named Calgacus. The Roman historian Tacitus even recorded a speech by Calgacus, where he famously said of the Romans, "They make a desert and call it peace." The tribes lost that battle, called Mons Graupius, but they didn't break. They melted back into the highlands and fought a guerrilla conflict for decades. They were so effective that the Emperor Hadrian finally gave up and built a massive 73-mile-long wall across the country, Hadrian's Wall, just to keep them out. Later, they built another wall farther north, the Antonine Wall. It failed too. The Picts had, in effect, set the northern border of the Roman Empire. After the Romans left Britain for good around 410 AD, the Picts stepped out of the shadows. The small tribes began to merge, forming larger kingdoms. The most powerful of these was called Fortriu, centered around the Moray Firth. This wasn't a land of mud huts. These people were master builders. All across the north, you can still find brokes. These are giant, circular, double-walled stone towers, some standing over 40 feet high. They are unique to Scotland and show an incredible engineering skill. They also built massive hill forts on top of high, rocky crags like Dunad, which became the capital of a different kingdom. And then there are the stones. This is their true legacy. There are about 350 of these symbol stones. They are divided into 3 groups. Class 1 stones are the oldest. They are usually rough, unshaped boulders with symbols simply carved into the natural rock. Class 2 stones are later, more complex. They are shaped slabs, and they feature the Pictish symbols alongside the Christian cross. This shows the Picts were slowly converting to Christianity. Class 3 stones are even later and are mostly just Christian crosses and art, with the old symbols gone. But what do the symbols mean? This is the core of the mystery. They are not just random doodles. They are a specific, repeating set of symbols. There's the crescent and V-rod, the double disc and Z-rod, and the notched rectangle. There are also beautiful, stylized animals, the wolf, the eagle, the salmon, the bull. But the strangest one, the one that has driven people crazy, is known simply as the Pictish beast. It's a bizarre creature that looks a bit like a dolphin or a seahorse, but with long, curling legs and a strange head. Nobody knows what it is. Is it a mythical creature? A clan symbol? A map? Many people are now convinced this was a real written language, a formal writing system, just like Egyptian hieroglyphs. The problem is, we have no Rosetta Stone. No text with both Pictish symbols and a known language like Latin to help us translate. The language they spoke, called Pictish, is also lost. Linguists think it was a Celtic language, related to Welsh and Cornish, but it was completely replaced by Gaelic in the 10th century. It vanished. So we have an entire library of stone books, and we can't read a single word. This art also shows up in their metalwork. In 1958, a schoolboy on St. Ninian's Isle found a buried treasure. It was a collection of 28 stunning silver objects, including bowls, brooches, and sword parts, all in the Pictish style. This was not the work of simple barbarians. This was a rich, sophisticated, and artistic society, and it was this complex society that held on to a tradition so strange, it fascinated historians for centuries. The motherhood mystery. For centuries, the single most famous fact about the Picts was their system of inheritance. It was called matrilineal succession. This idea is so strange, so different from almost any other European culture, that it defined them. So, what is it? To put it simply, it means power passes through the female line. A king would not be succeeded by his own son. Instead, the next king would be his nephew, specifically his sister's son. The royal bloodline, the right to rule, was believed to be carried by the women, not the men. Men could be kings, but they only got that right from their mothers or sisters. Now, why on earth did everyone believe this? It all comes back to that same historian, the Venerable Bede. Bede, the same man who told us the wrong Scythia story, also told a story about the Picts' arrival. He wrote that when the Picts first came to Britain, they had no women. They sailed to Ireland and asked the neighboring Scots, the Gaels, for wives. The Scots agreed, but only on one condition, that the Picts must always choose their kings through the female line, whenever the succession came into doubt. This story seemed to be supported by the Pictish king lists. These are the few written records we have about them, mostly written down after the Picts were gone, and the lists are weird. You'll see a king named Brede, son of Maelcon. But the next king is Gartnet, son of Demelch, and the next is Sinel, son of Luctreni. The fathers' names are all different. It doesn't look like a normal dynasty where a son follows his father. This baffling list seemed to prove Bede was right. It looked like the kings were being pulled from different families, all connected by their mothers. This theory became fact. It was taught in universities and written in every history book. It made the Picts seem impossibly exotic, a society built on a totally different set of rules. But the new DNA study just blew that entire theory out of the water. This is, to put it mildly, the most shocking part of the new research. The scientists decided to test this theory. They went back to the cemetery at London Links, the one with the high-status burials. They looked at a special kind of DNA, mitochondrial DNA, or mtDNA. This is a wow factor in genetics. You see, you get your main DNA from both parents, but you only get your mitochondrial DNA from your mother. It passes, unchanged, from a mother to her children. This makes it the perfect tool for tracing a direct maternal line, back through thousands of years. The scientists had a clear hypothesis. If the Picts really were matrilineal, and if society was matrilocal, meaning women stayed in their home community their whole lives and husbands moved in with them, then the people buried in that one cemetery should be related on their mother's side. Over generations, you would expect the mitochondrial DNA in that village to become very similar. Most people would share a few common female ancestors, so they ran the tests on the 7 individuals from London Links. The results came back, and it was the exact opposite of what the theory predicted. All 7 people had completely different mitochondrial DNA. None of them were closely related on their mother's side. The diversity was huge. What does this mean? It means the theory is wrong. The genetic evidence points to the opposite practice: female exogamy. This means women were not staying in their home villages. They were marrying out of their social groups and moving to their husbands' communities, sometimes from very far away. This discovery completely shatters the idea of a female-based power system. The thing nobody tells you is that this one piece of genetic data undoes 1,300 years of flawed history. So, what about those weird king lists? They're probably just a sign of a very complex system. Pictland wasn't one kingdom. It was a confederation of kingdoms. The kingship probably rotated between the leaders of several different powerful families. The son of might have just been a standard way of writing a name, not a literal statement of parentage. The Picts were complex, yes, but they weren't a magical matrilineal society. They were a local, Iron Age people, building kingdoms, fighting Romans, and, it turns out, following rules that were much more familiar than the legends claimed. But the DNA had one more paradox to solve. A puzzle that would explain why the Picts seemed to vanish from their own homeland. Finding the Picts in Ireland. The first DNA bombshell proved the Picts were local. The second proved their society was not matrilineal. The third bombshell came when scientists compared the ancient Pictish genomes to the DNA of modern people living today. This is where the story gets really fascinating. The expectation was simple. The ancient Picts lived in eastern and northern Scotland. Therefore, modern people in eastern and northern Scotland should have the most Pictish DNA. It just makes sense. But the results were a total paradox. The people in the old Pictish heartland of the East did have Pictish DNA. But the study found that modern people in western Scotland, as well as in Wales and Northern Ireland, all shared more genetic similarities with the ancient Picts than the people in their own eastern homeland. How is this even possible? It's a what moment for history. Were the Picts all forced to move west? Did they flee? The answer, it turns out, lies not with the Picts, but with everyone else. You see, in the early medieval period, Scotland, or Alba as it was known, was a very crowded and complicated place. The Picts were the biggest group, but they had three very powerful sets of neighbors. First, to the west, in the area called Argyll and the Islands, lived the Gaels. They were known as the Scoti, or the Scots. They had come over from Northern Ireland and set up their own kingdom, called Rewrote. They spoke a totally different language, Gaelic, which is related to Irish. Second, to the south, in the area around modern Glasgow, lived the Britons of Strathclyde. These people were Celtic cousins of the Picts, speaking a language similar to Welsh. Third, to the southeast, pushing up from modern-day England, were the Angles of Northumbria. They were a Germanic people, the ancestors of the English, and they were aggressive and expanding. For centuries, these four groups battled, traded, and intermarried. But the Pictish heartland in the east, being fertile and open to the sea, was a prime target. It got hit from all sides. The Angles pushed in from the south, the Gaels pushed in from the west. And then, the Vikings arrived. Starting in the late 8th century, Viking longships slammed into eastern Scotland and the Northern Isles. And the thing nobody tells you is that they didn't just raid and leave, they stayed. They conquered and settled huge parts of the Pictish heartland, as well as the islands of Orkney and Shetland. They brought their own Scandinavian DNA and began to mix with the local Pictish population. This is the key. The eastern Pictish homeland became a genetic melting pot. The original Pictish gene pool was diluted by centuries of mixing with Angles, Gaels, and most of all Vikings. But what about the West, and Wales, and Northern Ireland? These areas were more isolated. They saw less of this intense migration and mixing. The people there, the Gaels and the Welsh, were, it turns out, genetically very similar to their Pictish neighbors to begin with. They all shared that same deep, ancient British Iron Age ancestry. Because their regions were more stable, their DNA today preserved that ancient genetic signature more clearly. To really hammer this point home, we only need to look north to the remote Orkney Islands. This windswept archipelago was a known Pictish stronghold. Scientists, in this same groundbreaking study, analyzed DNA from Pictish individuals who lived in Orkney long before the first Viking longships ever scarred their beaches. And what did they find? The results were stunningly clear. These were the exact same people. Genetically, they were indistinguishable from the Picts on the mainland, confirming they were all part of the same local Iron Age population that had inhabited the land for centuries. That confirmation is crucial because what happened next in Orkney is a perfect miniature of what happened across the east. The Viking Age. The Norse didn't just raid, they came to stay. This massive, transformative wave of settlement, migration, and integration completely overwrote the genetic map of the islands. The Pictish signal wasn't erased, but it was diluted, buried under a powerful new layer of Scandinavian ancestry. The genetic landscape of Orkney was altered forever. This is the key. The Pictish DNA was never missing from the east of Scotland. It was simply buried. It's still there, a foundational layer beneath subsequent waves of arrivals, the Norse, the Anglo-Saxons, and everyone who followed. It's a ghost in the machine. But if you want to find a clearer echo of that ghost, you have to look west. In the more stable, more isolated regions of Western Britain and even across the sea in Ireland, that ancient genetic code was left relatively undisturbed. There, the signal of the original Iron Age Britons, the genetic family the Picts belonged to, rings out loud and clear. Your Pictish ancestor. Here's the final mystery, and it's the biggest one of all. Around the year 900 AD, the word Pict just stops. It vanishes. The chronicles, the histories, the meticulously kept Irish annals, they all stop talking about the Picts and their powerful northern kingdom of Fortriu. It's as if a tap was turned off. One decade, they are the dominant power in the north, a force to be reckoned with. The next, silence. In their place, all the records suddenly start talking about a new, unified kingdom, Alba. And the people who live in the exact same land are no longer called Picts. They are all called Scots. This is the moment the Picts seem to walk off the stage of history and into myth. It's a vanishing act on a national scale. How does an entire established people, a civilization that resisted the Roman Empire and built a kingdom, just disappear? For centuries, there was only one answer, and it was a brutal one: conquest and genocide. This is the first and most enduring wild theory. It's the Game of Thrones version of history, dark, bloody, and cynical. The story, told for generations, was that Kenneth MacAlpin, the king of the Gaels of Dalriada, was the villain. The Gaels lived to the west of Pictland, and the two kingdoms were old rivals. The legend is known as MacAlpin's treason. The story goes that Kenneth, pretending to seek a final lasting peace, invited the entire Pictish nobility, the king and all 7 of his ranking earls, to a great feast. In a scene that would inspire a red wedding, Kenneth and his Gaels waited until the Picts were drunk on wine and ale, their weapons set aside. Then, at a signal, the Gaels supposedly pulled hidden bolts from the benches the Picts were sitting on, dropping them into pits lined with spikes. Or, in other versions, they simply locked the doors to the Great Hall and slaughtered every last man. With the entire Pictish leadership decapitated in a single night of treachery, Kenneth MacAlpin could simply march his armies into a leaderless Pictland and take it for himself. He allegedly smashed the Pictish symbol stones, burned their records, banned their language, and forced his own Gaelic culture on the defeated, terrified survivors. In this version, the Picts didn't just merge, they were erased, wiped out. A cultural and literal genocide that paved the way for the new kingdom of Scotland. It's a fantastic story. It's dramatic. It makes for a great movie. And for a long time, it's what everyone believed. But the genetic evidence, combined with modern archaeology, tells a very different and much more interesting story. There's no archaeological evidence for this great slaughter, no mass graves, no burned-down cities from this exact period. In fact, the evidence points to the exact opposite. It wasn't a conquest, it was a merger. You see, the Picts and the Gaels of Dalriada were facing the exact same existential threat, the Vikings. The Norse raiders were hammering both kingdoms, tearing them apart. These weren't just hit-and-run raids anymore. This was the Great Heathen Army. The Vikings were settling, claiming land, and building their own kingdoms, like the powerful earldom of Orkney right on the Picts' northern doorstep. Both the Picts and the Gaels were being bled dry. To survive, the two old enemies had to do the unthinkable. They had to unite. Kenneth MacAlpin, the man at the center of this, was the perfect person to do it. It's now believed he wasn't just a Gael. He almost certainly had Pictish blood himself. How? Because the Picts had a wild theory of their own, their system of succession. The Gaels, like most of Europe, were patrilineal, power passed from father to son. But the Picts, bafflingly to outsiders, were matrilineal. Power was passed down through the mother's line. A king wasn't succeeded by his own son, but by his brother, or his nephew born of his sister. If Kenneth MacAlpin's mother was a Pictish princess, which is highly likely, then he wasn't a foreign invader at all. By Pictish law, he had a direct, legitimate claim to the Pictish throne. He didn't conquer the Picts, he inherited them. He was a product of both royal lines, the one man who could legally bridge the gap. He united the two crowns not with a sword, but with a family tree. But this down-to-earth truth opens up a brand new mystery. If it was a merger of equals, why did one side completely disappear? This is the real puzzle. In this merger, one culture had to become dominant. And for reasons historians still debate, it was the Gaelic culture that won. It wasn't just a win, it was a total cultural knockout. The Gaelic language, which would evolve into Scottish Gaelic, spread like wildfire across Pictland, replacing the native Pictish language. The Pictish language, the tongue of Calgacus, the language that held the key to the symbol stones, died out. It vanished so completely that it only survives in a few place names, like Aberdeen, which is a mix of Gaelic and Pictish, meaning mouth of the River Don. The Pictish church was reorganized under the Gaelic model. The Pictish political system was replaced. Why? How do you convince an entire nation to stop speaking its own language? This is where the new wild theories come in. Theory 1. The software takeover. This theory suggests it was a soft power victory. The Gaelic kingdom had one thing the Picts didn't: the monastery of Iona. This was the center of a powerful, organized, and literate Christian network. The Gaelic monks were the programmers of the new kingdom. They wrote the histories. They administered the laws. They were the ones teaching the new, unified nobility. The Gaelic language was the language of God, of law, and of high culture. The Pictish language, which may never have been widely written, was just local. To get ahead in the new kingdom of Alba, you had to speak Gaelic. Within a few generations, Pictish became the old language of grandparents in remote villages. It wasn't banned, it just became obsolete. Theory 2. The lost voice disaster. What if the Pictish culture was already on its knees before the merger? The Vikings hit Pictland hard. Their raids were focused on the great Pictish religious centers, like the monastery at Port Mahomac. This was a center of Pictish art, learning, and stone carving. The Vikings leveled it. It's possible the Vikings didn't just steal gold. They beheaded the Pictish intellectual class. They killed the artists, the scholars, and the religious leaders, the very people who preserved Pictish culture. When the merger with the Gaels happened, the Picts simply had no one left who could argue for their own side. Their voice had already been silenced by the Norse. Theory 3. The prophecy rebranding. This is the wildest theory of all. What if the Picts chose to disappear? What if the name Pict itself was seen as cursed? They had been fighting the Gaels, the Angles, and now the Vikings for centuries, and they were losing. What if their own seers or druids, the ones who supposedly guided the carving of the symbol stones, delivered a final prophecy? The Picts will fall. The Picts will be destroyed by the Sea Raiders, but the Scots will endure and rule this land for 1,000 years. In this scenario, the name change wasn't a surrender. It was a magical act, a ritual of national death and rebirth. To save themselves from the prophecy of doom, they had to die as Picts and be reborn as Scots. They willingly gave up their name, their language, their entire identity, as a sacrifice to survive. They rebranded themselves, not for politics, but to fool fate itself. Within a few generations, the people who lived in Pictland were the same people. Their DNA didn't change. But they no longer called themselves Picts. They spoke Gaelic and called themselves Scoti, or Scots. This is the down-to-earth truth. The Picts did not vanish. They were not wiped out. They just changed their name. The DNA study is the final, hard proof of this. It shows the deep, underlying genetic continuity. The lost tribe was never lost. They were simply absorbed, becoming the foundation of the medieval Scottish nation. Their bloodlines, their genes, are the bloodlines of millions of people in Scotland, and in the Celtic fringe of Wales and Ireland, to this day. They won. In the end, the Picts won. They survived the Vikings, and their new, combined kingdom of Alba would go on to become modern Scotland. But the price of that survival was everything that made them Picts. Those enigmatic symbols they carved on the stones are the last, silent monuments of a culture that didn't die, but simply transformed. They are the final words of a lost language, a language we can now be sure was spoken by the true indigenous people of Scotland. The DNA has rewritten their story. It's not a mystery of a lost tribe from Scythia. It's the story of the very ancestors of Scotland itself. The Picts are still here, hidden in the DNA of millions. Could other lost tribes from history just be hiding inside us, waiting to be found? Let me know your thoughts, and don't forget to like and subscribe.